The Discourse starts right now with Cheryl Oates and Erika Barudis.
Welcome back to The Discourse. The Alberta Legislature is back in session, and we can expect the theme of this fall to be Premier Smith will fight with anyone who crosses her path. Right now, the government is preparing to table legislation that will legislate teachers back to work, ending the largest teacher strike in Alberta's history and probably violating their charter rights. We expect that to happen this coming week, and we know the ATA is currently weighing its legal options in terms of how to respond. That could include a return to work, but a decision to work to rule, which means teachers will only perform their duties strictly to the letter of their contract. No extra hours, no extracurricular activities like sports or field trips, and no connection with students or families beyond their normal working hours. Plus, the government has released the third-party investigation into corruption in healthcare procurement. Their own headline was that the Premier and her cabinet were cleared of any wrongdoing. But if you read the report, it tells a much different story. And finally, the government has made a major move to two-tier healthcare, announcing they will significantly expand private access to diagnostics and testing in Alberta, including MRIs, CTs, and bloodwork. Obviously, this will have an impact on how you, as an Albertan, access these services in the public system.
Ooh, someone's feisty today, already first session. Okay, well, let's start off where you ended with the Minister of Health, Adriana LaGrange, and the Premier's announcement. Just to give full context to our listeners, so we'll play the official clip that they posted across social media platforms yesterday to give the background to our listeners.
That is why I am announcing today that the Government of Alberta is planning to introduce legislative reforms that will permit Albertans to privately purchase any private diagnostic screening and testing service that they wish. This includes MRIs, CT scans, full body scans, blood work, you name it. If there's a preventative test you wish to purchase, you will be entirely free to do so in Alberta. And that means that health professionals and medical organizations will be free to offer these services privately, and supplemental health benefit plans will be able to insure them. We want to see a flood of investment and health professionals into Alberta to strengthen our preventative health care system for Albertans right across the province, and this will help us to do it.
Now, to be clear, the UCP's public health guarantee remains in full force. And that means, first, when your family doctor asks you to get any kind of medical test, that test will continue to be covered by your Alberta healthcare insurance plan. Second, we will also ensure that these doctor-referred tests receive preferential treatment in all facilities, whether private or public, across the province. And we're taking it one step further. Third, if someone goes to a private clinic and purchases a preventative health test, and that test identifies a life-threatening condition that had not been previously known by that individual, the Government of Alberta will reimburse the cost of that private test to that individual.
Okay, so I actually think that this is one of the better UCP policies that I've seen rolled out. As we all know that, preventative care is a great way to address all the other challenges that we're having in our healthcare, that once they reach acute care, it's a high cost to the taxpayers. And even more importantly, if we're not finding early detection of this, patient's life and livelihood is at risk, as well as what that looks like from a treatment perspective going forward. So, and as we know, this is a change in the culture of healthcare, and something I think we can all advocate for more preventative measures. Especially with men, we know that there's not a lot of preventative or tests that they will go do unless they're told to, and they might dismiss early detection. And then potentially it can become too late or it's acute, which means it's harder to treat, especially the things that they talked about in the video, which is strokes, heart disease, and cancer. So I don't know. I actually think that this was a pretty good announcement for the government to roll out.
So I appreciate the spin, good spin, not just on your part, on the government's part. I find this entire announcement so infuriating. Do you know why people are waiting too long to get their symptoms looked at, which is how this video starts? It's not because they don't have the option to pay for private tests. It's because our healthcare system in Alberta is currently in chaos. So many people do not even have a family doctor, which means you can't even do the first step in getting a checkup, in getting a referral to diagnostics, in getting your symptoms looked at. People are waiting and waiting and waiting for diagnostic care that could save lives. And rather than investing in that in the public system, the government has chosen to create two-tier healthcare to say, if you can afford it, you can go get whatever test you want whenever you want. And for some, they could say, and I hear this all the time from some of my friends and some of my, people who could have the means to do this, is like, well, if I can, why don't you just let me? A couple of reasons why not to just let them. One is that we've seen in other jurisdictions where we have these preventative tests where people are going to get, for example, like a whole body MRI. They'll see things pop up. They have absolutely no symptoms. They're just doing a health check. They'll see things pop up that could be a false negative, that could be a flag of something that doesn't actually exist, that they are not symptomatic for, and they take that back to the public system. And it's a public system that has to deal with that. In some cases, those will be real things. And of course, we're glad that those people are getting the care that they need. Wish they could get it through the public system, though. In most cases, and the data shows, in most cases, this is nothing. It is just a way on the public healthcare system. And I don't want to just say that. Like, I want to be able to prove to you that this happens. In the UK, they looked at a survey where 91% of doctors in the system had encountered meeting a patient at an NHS appointment to discuss the result of private health screening. So they'd gone to get private screening, private testing. 91% of doctors are seeing someone who's done that. 13% of people thought this was a reasonable use of NHS resources, and 75% of the time, further resources within the public system were allocated to follow up. And so rarely, based on those results, are we seeing like real outcomes come out of that. And most of the time, we are seeing a draw on the public system. The other big piece that is detrimental to the public system is right now in Alberta, for example, we don't have enough radiologists for the public system. If you introduce a two-tier system, a private system, a for-profit system for diagnostics, you are pulling the few number of radiologists that we have in Alberta to a system that only a few people can afford, and that starves the public system. Radiologists aren't the only one, of the specialists that all Albertans need access to. And so in the end, yes, a few more people might get access to private tests, and they might feel good that they did their wellness check, but across the board, the public system will suffer for this.
But I would say that I think you're looking for the holistic solving of a healthcare system, which isn't going to happen overnight. And so if there's ways that we can take those measurements, I don't agree that it is going to impact the public healthcare system. I think actually not detecting them and having all of these individuals that don't get their screening, don't identify prevention, and take the actions early, those will actually have longer term impacts on our healthcare system. So I disagree with you there. When you come to your study from the UK, it's saying that only 13 of the professionals thought this was reasonable. That's not saying that 13% was the only time that they found results. Like, I don't understand how, if we're introducing something that we right now use radiologists and all the mostly radiologists, I'll use in this case because of MRIs. We only allocate certain amount of government funding within the system to do that because we have to operate within our means. If an individual can then go and get those tests and they find early detection and then they go back into the system, yes, if someone finds something, we should be addressing it within the public healthcare system. If they don't find anything, that's on the back of the individual that decided to get this screening. I don't even put ideology aside how you can say that it's a bad thing for the system to have people go and have the ability to go get these preventative tests that ultimately will impact the bottom line of our healthcare because they're getting them early. And if not, great. But introducing one solution in the grand scheme of all the problems that we have within the healthcare system to help alleviate the acute care and hospital impacts where we're seeing most of the challenges within our system right now, I don't see how you can disagree with introducing this. I'm not saying it's the only solution, but I just don't see how you can't support it. But I just don't but you're saying it's because some people can't afford it.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it hurts the public healthcare system. And if you look at the overwhelming evidence, there's so much evidence. There is many studies that show routine, non-risk-based general health checks do not reduce illness or death, but they do increase downstream interventions, which means if you go get a test and you see something you don't like, you're going to go back to the public system and ask them for a whole bunch of stuff that you probably, based on the data, do not need. So it just adds more burden to the public healthcare system.
But what we do right now, Cheryl, is we go through all of those tests if someone comes, and
because they have symptoms.
We have several. Some people can just ask, and if your family doctor, who's also private, decides that they want to put you through the ringer of tests because they decide that that's
but usually
in the
there's
best
a reason
interest,
to do that. Like there's a reason. Like you come with
or
a symptom.
sometimes it's that the patient wants it.
No one sent. There is no doctor that's going to send you for an MRI just because you want one. There isn't.
I disagree. I can guarantee that happens.
You have to have some kind of symptom. You don't just enter the system and be like, you know what? I'd like a full body check, a whole body MRI
But I don't think
today.
that's what people are coming for. I think they're saying
That's exactly what this announcement said.
But it's also saying if you sit there and you have a family history of X, Y, and Z, or you potentially, a family member thinks that the people in the news release were the dementia associations. Like that's something I think many people interact with. If you could get early detection into dementia, and this allows for that maybe a doctor isn't going to put at the top of the list, or it's something uncomfortable for the patient to bring forward. If I came to my doctor and said, I have family history of dementia, I would like to go through this process. I don't have any signs of it necessarily, but I might that I don't know of. Early onset dementia is very hard to detect. So this is one of those paths where it's something that a doctor might not immediately say that they're going to do. If a doctor has the opportunity to say, you know what, if you pay for it, you can go get it. And they might find detection in a lot of people, which ultimately then will reduce the long-term strain on the healthcare when that person didn't get the detection and now they're in acute care.
But the data shows us that that's not what happens. Like, I agree. It is a logical argument for people to make. And I think like the spin works well in the video that the government put out. But this isn't a new idea. It's been tried. It's been tested. We have seen that this kind of health check technology does not increase public health outcomes. It does not increase diagnosis and intervention sooner. What we've seen is an increased burden on the public system and regular people having less access to public resources. And so it's fine to say that we expect all these outcomes, but the data shows us that's not what we should expect.
I know you're just talking about like one or two studies because we've seen it in other jurisdictions. We've seen feasibility studies of and we continue to see other provinces doing exactly this.
But there's no data on the outcomes.
But you also can't compare, okay, so if we have preventative care, it would cost this amount for this test. If that person is an individual who then gets diagnosed with lung cancer, the government gave stats of what the impact is on survival rate and recovery rate, as well as the long-term impacts of how many more doctor's visits they need, how much more strain on the healthcare, how many other treatments, and all of those things. I think you hate it because it's two-tier and that the UCP did it.
I hate it because it's wrong, and I hate it because it's going to impact public healthcare access for normal people. Let's just think of it this way. Let's say 100 people go get an MRI wellness check. We're not talking about people with symptoms because they can just go to their doctor. If you think there's something wrong with you, go to your doctor and you will get a test. If you have genetic markers that predispose you to a condition, also just go to your doctor. You can get a test. If you just want a wellness check, which is what the government is offering here, like, for example, MRI wellness check, 100 people go get an MRI wellness check. And then 98 of those people see something they don't like or that they're concerned about, even though they're asymptomatic on their MRI, they're all going to go into the public system and say, well, I saw this on my MRI wellness check. Should I be concerned? Probably like one of those people might have an actual condition. We're so happy for that one person that they got intervention earlier than they need. But the 97 people who entered our system push out 97 other people who were already in an acute stream or in a family physician stream that could have had access to the healthcare system sooner. And that is the ultimate problem.
But two things. One, that person, if they do have the impacts, they are going to be in the system at some point. They are going to be a stress on the healthcare system, and in lots of cases, way higher with less likeliness.
But you're talking about pushing 97 people out.
But what if it is the opposite? What if we get
it's not.
Out of the 50,
the data shows it's not.
But we also don't have this en masse to see people could do it. No, we do.
There's hundreds of studies. There is a mass of data. I don't have a list of the studies, but it is widely studied. This isn't new. This is widely studied in jurisdictions around the world. And there is not, I can't find a study that shows that that's the outcome.
Okay, but we have the ability, if I wanted to go get an MRI tomorrow and pay private, I could. There is no wait list. So if that's not impacting the volume that is going within the public system to
but
go get this
that's a
test.
Band-Aid to the fact that the public system isn't working.
I am not saying that this is the solution to everything, Cheryl, but I'm saying in the interim or lack of the complete reforms that the government is doing, why wouldn't we explore this? So I go and I get my test and nothing happens. There's no findings that I am nothing but perfect health. My body is a temple. The government doesn't pay me for that. But something happens and it was missed by a family doctor, which happens. There was all
I get
can
that.
do
And
that.
for those people, that's great. But the majority of people, that's not going to be the case. 91% of doctors in the UK are seeing someone who's bringing them a private result. And most of those people don't have a real problem. That will happen here too.
But I would say you're still going to use the public system because that's what it's there for. I get what you're saying in the sense of if we could throw trillions of dollars into revamping all of this and hiring 1,000 people.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
That don't exist. But but I'm saying if we were looking at this holistically, this is not the one shot solve all the problems. I get what you're I get
it makes
that.
the problems worse is my point.
I don't believe it does because if you can prevent something and people can get early intervention, the cost on the healthcare system, the longevity of their visits, the livelihood of their lives to detect some of these things, and their success rate is so much higher that yes, there still will be an impact on the healthcare system. But I would argue the longevity and the dollar value, if you want, will be less because we're doing it at an early stage as opposed to a later stage.
Okay. So cool that you think that. Cool the government thinks that. No data backs that up. I will happy to be proved wrong in the future.
I think you just hate it because it's anything to do with two-tier healthcare.
But that's such a dismissal of everything that I just said.
But I do. I think that there's
yes, I
don't
believe
like
that everyone
government.
should have. No, I think the government's doing lots of wrong things. I don't oppose this because I ideologically oppose it. I oppose it because I think that every person in Alberta deserves access to public health care at the same level. And this says if you're rich, you can go do whatever you want and use resources for whatever you want and get whatever you test you want.
Or if you think it's important for your well-being, you don't have to be rich to want to go get an MRI.
I give up. Let's move to the next thing.
Okay. Well, we'll move to another gem. The Wyant Report. So I think we've talked about this several times about when it didn't also get reported or delays, but we officially have it. And so just as a quick recap, the retired Judge Raymond Wyant has released his investigation into AHS procurement. And I did kind of nerd out on my Star Wars love, and I was going to do this whole trilogy thing, but to cut it short and to not make me look like a huge nerd or only speak to maybe 1% of the population that listens to our podcast that would follow, if the goal of the government was to showcase the inefficiencies and lack of proper procurement process by AHS and possibly Alberta Health, they accomplished that. They made it very clear, and I was skeptical the first time I read the report because I was like, oh, this is very narrow. I went back and looked at what the government committed to in their press releases, what the government in their press conferences also committed to. The scope was very clear. So if people were expecting a smoking gun or something like that from this report was solely based on the AHS procurement, specific to a few cases that we'll get into, being this Alberta Surgical Group and the Tylenol, the Turkish Tylenol, as Cheryl likes to call it. I will say, if I'm
Tylenol
summarizing
gate,
it,
if you will.
This is Act 1. So it highlighted a lot of things that Athana Menzalopoulos brought forward about concerns within how AHS functions, their due diligence that is done on various cases. I can say when I was being briefed when in that office, there's a lot that I think are concerns about how AHS operated, which is probably why we are at the place where they will not operate on the entire healthcare system, which we're the only ones in the country that do something like that, and go into being that acute care provider, which is their original intention. So I do think if people were looking for something huge and political, and as I've said, the head on the platter, this scope of this project was Act 1. I think if you're looking for that, watch Act 2 and Act 3, which would be the Auditor General report and the RCMP likely investigation that Judge Wyant even highlights in his report. So I'll turn it over to you, who I think probably has a rant of sorts.
I do. I have a rant to offer on this one because, yes, there's a lot of limitations in this report because of the scope and the terms of reference of this report. But let's remember who set the terms of reference of this report. The terms of reference were set by the government, by the premier, by the cabinet. The government's headline in the press release that they sent out with this report is that the premier, her cabinet, and her staff have been cleared of any wrongdoing. But if you read the report, that is not true. In
Can
fact,
I just stop you right there? Because I want to say, all the headlines also said that. So I think it's interesting. I was surprised. I want to get your take before
I say anything else.
Well, no, but just on the journalistic side of the headlines said that too.
Okay, well, let's just wait. Let me just get through what the report actually says, and then we can talk about why the headlines are wrong.
Sit back and drink some coffee.
Thank you. Just leave me 30 seconds. Okay,
I don't think it's
so
30.
the report says that the premier, and this is the headline, the premier, her cabinet, and her staff have been cleared of any wrongdoing. I encourage everybody to read this report. In the first few paragraphs, it's a 42-page report. The judge makes it really clear that he did not have the power to subpoena or hear testimony under oath. And so that means that people could just decline to be interviewed. And people did decline to be interviewed. He says that in his report. It also says that even if they agreed to be interviewed, they could just decline to answer questions. And people did do that. He says so in his report. He also says that he had no way to verify the credibility of the information provided and was sometimes left with the impression that people were not always telling the truth. In his report, he says explicitly, "When I find there was no wrongful interference by any government official in the matters concerning this report, that only means that I found no evidence of such, but I am not in a position to make a final and absolute determination." And that might be because neither the premier nor her cabinet, including the health ministers involved in this, participated in the investigation. None of them participated. They're not listed in the people who participated. The report did find, as Erika said, that the government's procurement policies were not followed in regard to Tylenol Gate, that the people who worked on that file, who worked in the procurement, were conflicted and failed to disclose their conflicts. The judge said that the entire process lacked due diligence, that the decision was made hastily, and that, to quote him, "Alberta taxpayers have paid a significant price for products that, for a variety of reasons, have not benefited Albertans." Just quickly on surgical facilities, because that one is a little more, the thread is a little bit more complicated to follow in the report. The judge did find here that procurement policies were not followed the way they are normally followed. That is not to say that, he didn't find that someone explicitly did something wrong for the central and south zones, but the procurement policies were not followed for the Edmonton zone. And so just in summary, all of this started because AHS CEO Athana Mentzelopoulos filed a wrongful dismissal lawsuit, claiming that she was fired for raising concerns around healthcare procurement and conflicts of interest. When she raised those issues, the government fired her. This report finds those issues did exist. They found both procurement problems and conflict of interest problems. And although this doesn't answer all the questions, in fact, it raises a whole bunch more questions. We could get those answers in both the Auditor General's report and the RCMP report. But we could have got them all right now if the government had just agreed to a public inquiry.
That wasn't 30 seconds. But I get your point. So this did come from Athana Mentzelopoulos. I wouldn't say that she was fired for thinking, there was a lot that she exposed. I think a lot of the comments that she made her lawsuit still haven't been addressed, because I think that there is an expansion of her allegations she made against the government and Alberta Health Services. I will say I've never been so confident that the right thing to do was to dismantle AHS than I am reading this report because of things like conflicts of interest, CFO, bringing someone back on and not doing their due diligence in checking that there was no conflict, that it was okay that this person was a contractor. I think it exposed a lot of the probably frustration that Thana had, probably frustration that the Minister of Health had with how AHS was operating. But again, I don't think that this gives the government the full clear, because there's still the Auditor General report and there is a potential RCMP investigation. But it did actually, and reading it, you're right, the Alberta Surgical Group stuff was a little bit more complicated. But I think what the public could take from this, and as the headline said, there was challenges within AHS's procurement, which was the government's intention for this.
So this is the part that kind of makes me mad, is that yes, this report finds that procurement was not followed and there was conflicts of interest. But let's look at why the government deviated from its procurement policies. In both the Tylenol procurement and in the approved procurement exception order, these are government directives. So yes, the AHS system deviated from what it normally does in procuring these. Why did they deviate? Because the Minister of Health directed them to, in a written directive, to deviate from their processes. Does that break a rule? No, because the Alberta government, the ministers have the power to make these directives. Does it mean that it was the right thing to do? Does it mean it was in the interest of taxpayers and in the interests of Albertans? Absolutely not. But the reason that we see deviation from normal processes here is because the minister directed these groups to do it.
And to be clear, we're talking about Jason Copping in the report that is highlighted, not Adriana LaGrange. So I do think that that's something I just wanted to make clear, that this minister request on these files, Adriana has just inherited all of this, was not part of those discussions. But yeah, so what is your biggest concern? Because I sit here and I'm like, okay, this is one report. It was an independent government study that was very, very hyper-focused, and you can see some of the challenges and gaps that presents. But the whole, I think, reason for this independent study was to really review that, like, procurement within AHS, as opposed to maybe the full gamut of what Athana Menzalopoulos was allocating.
I mean, I just wanted to correct one thing, because the report does detail a 2024 directive to sign with chartered for surgical facilities, and that is Adriana LaGrange, because she was the minister at that time. It says AHS take immediate steps in consultation with the department to extend its November 22 agreement with Alberta Surgical Group to 2025. So basically...
Okay, so both ministers.
Both ministers are named in the report. Both their directives are published in the report. Overall, my takeaway from this is basically that the concerns that I had around the allegations raised have so much more credibility now. Like, as an Albertan, not just as someone on the opposite side politically in terms of my political allegiance, but as an Albertan, it is troubling to hear allegations that the government might not be procuring services in the interest of Albertans, in the interest of taxpayer dollars, and that someone somewhere is benefiting from inflated contracts and workarounds in terms of the procurement. And although all of those allegations are not completely proven in this report, there is much more evidence. Well, certainly it is proven that procurement was not followed. It is proven that there was conflicts of interest. And so this is the beginning.
At the AHS level, like they do mention who has.
Yes, at the AHS level. But what is going on at the political level? Because this report didn't look at that.
Well, and they did offer, there is Marshall Smith, former chief of staff to the premier, was mentioned.
What is that?
So there was,
like, what is that?
I don't know if
when you don't know
Judge
what questions he answered, when you don't know.
And fair. All I'm saying is that, like, they did ask. I would assume that if the premier or Adriana were asked in this scenario, that they would have, given they called for the independent inquiry, they would participate, because they could be listed, and it would actually, I think, be more beneficial if they were listed. Again, to your thing, that the scope and authority in which Judge Wyant has is very different than the Auditor General.
Because the government chose that.
But either way, though, Cheryl, I think, like, what I'm saying is this is Act 1. This was on the procurement process of AHS. I think it showed very clearly that the suspicions and concerns that people had about AHS and the procurement have been shown to have conflicts of interest by people in AHS. Checkbox, right? All the headlines address that. Does this, like, let's maybe switch into the political implications, because the Auditor General might get a little bit more of a playbook by looking at this. Judge Wyant says in the report that they operated in independent of each other and in silos of each other, which I think is totally fair. So lots of these people will be having to do interviews by both and possibly the RCMP. If what you're trying to get to on the political interference or the concerns, like you said, you've had, or I think what we're all looking for is just the truth, I believe those other pieces, as I call Act 2 and 3, but the Auditor General will expose that. So I still think we'll get to the truth. And I personally would rather have an Auditor General, the RCMP, say that than a public inquiry. And I do think the purpose and the intention of this government was to showcase AHS's inefficiencies, and I think they were successful in that.
Well, of course that was their goal. Like it's easy to push it onto AHS and make the public service wear the blame. I'm just going to go back to what I've already said, is that the AHS acted this way because the health minister told them to.
And that will be exposed if that's the case,
But
right?
maybe not. Like, there's no reason. They're not breaking a rule. The minister is allowed to issue whatever directive they want. They're allowed to sole source contract if they want. It doesn't mean it's the right thing to do, and it doesn't mean they shouldn't be held accountable for it.
And fair,
Transparency is what this whole process is lacking.
And this is what I'm saying is that, like, if it comes back that I'll use my Alison Redford. When Alison Redford went through stuff, she was found not breaching any of her duties.
Yeah, it's
Public perception felt differently, right? Yeah. And so she resigned not on what was true and untrue. And that's what I wanted to kind of ask is, like, and maybe shift the conversation is, like, what are the implications? Like, because yes, in that case, Alison Redford was found innocent of everything, was not breaching any or going outside of her scope as premier. However, the end result of her tenure as premier ended because of public perception, because of, like you said, transparency or trust. That is something I think this government needs to be very concerned with. Any government going through any type of scandal, whether they're directly implicated or not, it speaks to that. And I do think if the Auditor General, we've said this before, if the Auditor General and the RCMP show something very different, that would have a significant impact on this administration.
And it's interesting because I keep hearing people say, like, okay, well, they're doing all this stuff, but their numbers aren't suffering. That's true. Like, Danielle Smith has had just, like, from my perspective, just frustratingly great approval numbers and support from the public since she became premier. And, they've barely moved. She didn't get a really big honeymoon. She didn't get a really big dip. She's had pretty stable numbers. But we know, and Alison Redford is a great example of this, that over time, these little things can start to chip away at the credibility of a government. And although people might not say, the Wyant Report really, like, ended it for me, and now I don't trust the government, these little pieces where we have credibility chipped away and chipped away and chipped away, when it actually comes time to make a decision about who you want to lead your government for the next 4 years, those will have an impact. And the Conservatives should have learned this lesson the hard way. Like, 2015 was a great example of that. It just, like, it was little thing after little thing after big thing after little thing that eventually chipped away to the point where people were looking for an alternative and were happy to choose the fourth party over the governing party for that sake. So I do think this can have some long-term impact on the government's political success, but I agree it's not happening right now.
Well, and I hope that they take it seriously. Do you know what I mean? And I do think that they are, and I think they should continue to take this seriously because of the political implications or the public losing any credibility with the public. That is far more important in getting reelected than anything, as we both know. And like we said, this isn't clearing the government. It's showing some of the stuff I think that the government was pointing to and criticizing AHS for, and justification for the reforms that they were taking, but they are not out of the woods yet. And so these other reports where you don't get to say, no, I'm not answering that question, or no, thank you, I don't want to do the interview, no one will be able to escape that in the other reports that were coming. So still more to come, but I would say the headlines were shockingly and overwhelmingly, like, I'm like, did you just take the press release from the Premier's office?
And, like, this is from the other side. Like, someone who's worked on those press releases, like, they must look at that and be like, wow, we hit it out of the park on this one.
Well, yeah,
basically,
when I did that,
the government released a press release that said the premier and her cabinet are cleared as sort of like the top takeaway point. And news outlets across Alberta ran with that as the headline, even though the judge says explicitly that he didn't.
The biggest success of comms, like, I was in Redford's office, I was in Premier's comms, and if you got someone to take your press release and just put it in, sometimes happen in rural weeklies, but this was across the board, every outlet.
So disappointing.
I mean,
this is where we're at.
I think it's, yes, yeah. Thanks, journalists. But, it is a long report. I did think that a lot of the recommendations made sense moving forward, but that'll now be part of the government.
He couldn't clear them is in the first 3 pages.
Yeah. And that's because, like I said, I don't think this was about all the other conflicts of interest at the government level or the allegations made by Athana. This was specific to the procurement process done by AHS. I think it will all get exposed one way or the other, and it won't help if this report doesn't reflect the other reports. It'll actually hurt the government, I think, rather than help them.
And I will say, just a touch duplicitous for the government to release that as their own headline, hoping that journalists would run with it. It worked.
Hey,
but
we got lazy journalists. That's what we're taking from this.
Yeah.
Okay, well, If anyone saw my LinkedIn or Instagram yesterday, if not, you should be following me. But Cheryl and I were both the final instructors. Cheryl teaching influencing and communicating public policy, and I was teaching election communications to the applied politics and public affairs students of the first cohort who at Maccabee College who completed their first year of studies. So if you're like, hey, I want to learn more about that, that sounds cool. I could listen to Erika and Cheryl all day long. Well, make sure that if you want to know how government works, you want to be a part of shaping public policy, learning how to navigate political situations and influence change, or just dream of running campaigns, check out maccabeecollege.com/programs to learn more about the Applied Politics and Public Affairs Diploma Program that will get you the skills you need for public affairs or political career in just under 2 years. Okay, we're coming back full circle to what everyone is paying attention to day in, day out. We suspect that we will have resolved. Cheryl highlighted it in our intro that the government is very likely, and I can say probably with confidence, that will legislate teachers to go back to work. I suspect they will do that very quickly as kind of their first action as the legislature resumes on Thursday with its throne speech, and business will resume Monday through Thursday next week. But there's some things that can happen as a result that we want to talk about. Besides protests continuing on, I suspect the government will move forward with the legislation, which is called Return to Work. But we might also see a work to rule. And Cheryl, I'll get you to kind of explain some of that from some other jurisdictions that you've worked with on that or seen. But just to be clear, like this is, yes, the biggest strike in Alberta's teachers' history. We haven't had it since 2002, I believe. And let's just say the population was not what it was today. But we've also seen this since 2016 in numerous other jurisdictions, Nova Scotia, Saskatchewan, which Cheryl, you've mentioned on our show before, that they took a work to rule action in Ontario a few times, I think, from 2019 to 2020. So this isn't uncommon, and it's not unprecedented for the government to have to legislate. I think nobody wanted to get here, but here we are. Teachers, the ATA and the government can't agree to move forward on a path. And so it comes down to first legislating them to go back to work, and then should they choose, them deciding to use work to rule. So yeah, where do you think that puts us?
Well, let's just remember that teachers are only going to work to rule if the government legislates them back to work, which in my opinion is the government choosing to just like completely cop out of actual negotiation and addressing the many, many concerns that not only teachers have, but as we've seen in polling, the general public has about the education system right now. Many jurisdictions across Canada have opted not to legislate teachers back because of the incredible political risk that it carries, the precedent that it likely violates the charter rights of teachers to strike. We've seen this in multiple jurisdictions, including in Saskatchewan in 2024. Where teachers did rotating strikes and the province ultimately decided not to legislate them back to work because of the incredible political risk that it carried. We saw this in other jurisdictions in 2022. Ontario first did order teachers back to work, and then they changed their mind and repealed that legislation because the political risk is so high. And I think this really could be an inflection point in this discussion where if teachers can communicate effectively to say, like, what is at stake and what the government is choosing not to negotiate on. And if they work to rule, that means they're going into the classrooms, they're going back to work because they must, because there is penalties and fines for not going back to work, but that they're only doing exactly what their contracts stipulate, and then likely entering into binding arbitration. So does this get us further ahead? Maybe not.
I don't disagree. I don't think it gets us further ahead. So my question for you, because this isn't the first action the government wanted to take, the government actually proposed to ATA last week that they would go into ongoing mediation in order to not have to legislate and have teachers return to work similar to what other provinces have done, where either you could look at a rotating strike or you could look at return to work while we still work all of this out. And then if you feel disgruntled still, you are more than welcome to strike again. The ATA turned that down. I think that was the last play before legislation that other provinces have had similar conversations, and the union, in the best interest of the children, decided to go back to work so that it doesn't impact diplomas, which is a big thing the government is looking at right now, is why they feel they need to legislate. But I think the government did what they needed to do to ask the ATA and the teachers to go back to work while they're not saying it's solved. But the ATA turned it down. And that, to me, I think was also a critical play to show the true intentions by the ATA, meaning that it's not about the kids anymore. It's about teachers. And so I think that that was a big miss by the ATA. And I don't know why they wouldn't agree to return to work while still having the conversation.
I disagree. I think that the majority of the public is with the teachers right now, and they should do everything they can to leverage that public support. And that means pushing for everything that they're asking for. And this isn't the government's only option. The government doesn't just have to go to mediation or just have to order teachers back to work. They could offer the teachers a different deal than they've offered the last two rounds. They could move a little bit. They could listen to the public who is saying teachers are underpaid, the system is suffering, the system is underfunded, and you're not going far enough. And they could move. That is the easiest way to move the negotiation forward. Saying we're just going to legislate you back to work is deciding not to participate in that discussion anymore.
I would also argue that the ATA agreed to not come back to the table numerous times. They have not come to the table. Then they issued a draft of what they think that the changes need to be, and without costing. I'll say I looked at it. I talked to family members that are teachers. I'm like, yeah, this sounds really great. The difference is that the ATA finally, for once, actually put together what they're asking for from the government, specifically on classroom complexities and how to address that. The challenge is that they didn't cost it. Then it gets costed, and it's, in addition to everything, another $2.6 billion. Like, I don't know, would the NDP sit there and back that? Would they say, absolutely, we're going to do exactly that, inject all of this? Or, and then the ATA wouldn't come back to the table to even discuss it. They said, this is our ask, we'll keep striking. So I don't think that the government, and so you think they should, but do you think that if you have asked for, and maybe this is their Cadillac version, because they've finally given it to the government of what they're truly asking for, I think probably after criticisms that they hadn't, $2.6 billion in addition to the $2 billion that this deal would offer, in addition to what they did in the budget. How is that fathomable for taxpayers or individuals or anyone that's interacting, looking at that and being like, that's double? So if they're asking for Cadillac, then, and they're hoping for a middle, and that's probably where we might get to. If that's their strategy, why wouldn't they at least come back to the table to discuss it? Because they didn't. They also refused to sit it down.
The government has refused to talk about complexity to this point. So this is like a first foray into talking about complexity. The government to this point has said this is not part of this negotiation, even though Alberta is the last jurisdiction not to include language around complexity in its agreements. So I think the teachers should. I think the teachers should make a point and ask for everything that the education system needs right now. I think they should make sure that Albertans understand that we are in this position because of the decisions that the government made to underfund the system to this point. And they should absolutely advocate for everything the education system needs right now. And it is completely reasonable that the government should come back and say that's not doable right now. But let's create a plan to make the education system better with the finances that we have. I mean, that's the government's role. That is the government's job to come back in a negotiation and say, we understand your point. We will acknowledge education needs a reset, and here's what we're willing to do. And that's how a negotiation moves forward. If the government continues to say, we don't want to talk about complexity, yeah, you're going to hit an impasse.
I think that the way that the ATA did it, like they basically said, I don't think they did it in the way that maybe would have given them the credibility that you're giving them.
But
if
it
they
doesn't
had
really
come
matter.
and costed the plan, and like look at anywhere in the private sector, in business, in any type of actual negotiations outside of collective bargaining, you wouldn't be like, please, sir, can I have a blank check? Like that's what the ATA did when they costed it. They're like, look at this vehicle, but you can't really like assess it. You can't do an inspection of it. Just what you'll do is you'll give me a blank check and then I'll fill that all in. That's, I think, how the ATA presented this. Can you tell me, like, the NDP is sitting there saying that they'll, like, fund public health care. Are they okay with 2.6 now being $4.6 billion of injection into education right now and going double into deficit?
So you cannot like the way that it's presented all you want. Like you can say you don't like the way they've acted in bargaining, you don't think they've had good communications, that you don't like that they've, not assigned a number to complexity. You cannot like all of that. But until there is a massive shift in how the public feels about this, it doesn't matter to the public. The public is siding with teachers, and the public is not saying, teachers, you should have costed your complexity. The public is saying the education system is in turmoil. The government has underfunded it for now 6 years, and we need a drastic reset. And those two things align right now. The ATA is asking for a drastic reset.
And I hear you. My question was, though, is the NDP willing to
Who
back
cares? The
and
NDP is
inject?
not in power.
Because they come out and they're sitting here. But everything
But
you
Erika,
say
this
now
doesn't happen in a silo.
But that's
like,
a dodge.
If the NDP,
if the
no, that's
NDP
not a
stands there and
dodge.
says, we'll stand with teachers, we'll do everything, which they're saying loud and proud every single day, are they okay with $2.6 billion
That's not how negotiation
additional?
works. That's not how negotiation works. The NDP can say loudly, yes, there's a problem in education. Yes, we will absolutely fund enrollment growth. Yes, we will hire new teachers. Yes, we will build new schools. And yes, we will absolutely address complexity. If that's not $2.6 billion, maybe it's a road to $2.6 billion. But you don't have to say explicitly, like as an opposition party, today, based on the government's budget, this is where we would pull $2.6 billion from. You have to say, I agree that this is really important to the future of education in Alberta, and we would make it a priority, a spending priority.
Yeah, but it's an opposition cop-out.
Well, it's much better than a government cop-out.
The government, I don't think, is copping out. I truly believe that the deal that's on the table, increase of teachers, does it solve the problem today? No. We all know that. There is all these other variables that are impacting it. 100 schools will be built in the next 3 to 5 years that will probably address a significant amount of classroom sizes. It addresses student ratio, which indirectly addresses classroom complexities, because if you reduce the numbers, you don't have as many challenges. I still believe that the inclusivity approach to how we do classrooms could be reviewed. If I was the government, I'd push for that, because that also impacts classroom complexities. They've offered more EAs into the classroom. This is the second
After
budget
they cut
that they've
150,000.
Well, but then all of the school boards went and fired them all. So we got a lot of people not doing the right things. If you're going to be critical of the government, they went and fired a bunch of all the EAs. Then you're going to hire them back.
The root cause of this is the government's decision not to prioritize it. And the government can think and stand on its moral high ground all at once and say that it's right. But until the public agrees that it's right, it has a problem here.
And I think that going back to school and seeing, it'd be very interesting. I think when they go to work to rule, they'll be like, oh, this is exactly the same what our teachers did before. It's like they weren't going above and beyond. I think that's risky for them too. There is some great teachers. The extracurriculars, I think, are the biggest ones that people will notice the impact. But I think that the ATA is equally walking a challenging line that could shift public perception.
I think that's so deeply offensive and inaccurate to the work that most teachers do, that are spending hours preparing, spending their, just let me say this, spending their own money to prepare their classrooms, spending hours giving kids extra help before and after class, marking and grading papers, doing extracurricular activities, contacting parents and students outside of class. Like that will absolutely be noticed.
If it's not the case, and you know what? There's some incredible teachers that do that, and I think they should be rewarded and compensated accordingly and move up their grid a heck of a lot faster. People and teachers that do extracurricular and teach or do coaching and all of that stuff and dedicate more time, they should be compensated. The challenge with the union and the model is they don't. So the person that's coasting, not doing all those things, it is going to be exposed pretty quickly to each classroom and to each teacher who are the people that go above and beyond their scope. So I think it's also a risk that the ATA is going to deal with, because I'm not saying this is everyone. I'm saying you will see, though, that there's a lot of those teachers that don't do that. We've had, even in COVID, night and day experience from one of our stepdaughter's schools and the other. And it was mind-boggling to see the discrepancy of how teachers were approaching that. They have their individual rights. I'm saying that it's going to expose who I think should be rewarded and compensated. I'd bid to give more teachers money that do those things, pay them for it, because they're the ones that are making the difference in the kids' lives. But unfortunately, the model of a union does not allow for those people to be rewarded or compensated. And I think that public perception could shift based on this too. Like, it's risk for both. To go work to rule as well as legislating, both have huge risks. And I don't know right now where the public's going to going to go on it.
We
Right
have
now,
an
you're
idea.
right. They're supporting the teachers right now. I think legislation, as you've said in other provinces, is risky. I think this government feels that there's no other option because after months of negotiating, the only plan they've got from the teachers after months and months of talking is a plan that has sunshines and rainbows in their Cadillac version. Where was this 6 months ago?
But the only thing that the teachers have gotten from the government, pardon me, is the same offer over and over again. So,
They increased the teachers' numbers. They increased the EAs after the first negotiation. The government has given stuff up. I haven't seen, but where do you go when ATA didn't even have a plan from day one? They finally put something out, Cheryl,
Erika,
and it's
we've heard the
mind-boggling.
criticism of how you feel about the ATA's communication strategy. What happens at the table is much different than what happens in the public realm, and that is how negotiation should work.
But the ATA is also not willing to come to the table. They are being the ones that decided to strike.
Well, they've
They're
got
the ones-
leverage now.
But they have a lot of teachers that don't have any money. So
Yeah,
at
well,
least
that
the
will be a
government's
problem, too.
making sure that they're getting paid when they go back to work. I do think that the public perception might flip on this. It could go really horribly for the government if they don't do it right. Absolutely agree. I don't think the 12% is changing. I think the conversation is on classroom complexities and how to address that. Absolutely. Does the government feel they need to budge more? I don't know. But I do think that there's equal risk to the teachers and on public perception going forward too. It's getting muddy.
I guess we'll see. We'll see. So, it will
Awesome.
play out over the next week, and I imagine that people's will solidify their opinions of how things are going pretty quickly.
Yep, I think so. Okay, well, that's another week. I covered a lot today. So as always, I feel like we're never at a shortage of content. I think we actually didn't even talk about municipal elections because we decided that didn't make the cut today. But thanks for listening. We'll be on other podcasts too, talking about some of that. So we'll post and make sure to share that information. But we'll be back next week. And until then, as always, follow us on X, Instagram, and TikTok.
And do us a favor, if you haven't already, please like and subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.
The Discourse is hosted by Cheryl Oates and Erika Barudis. Follow on Instagram @The Discourse Pod. Subscribe to The Discourse on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.